We are now recording.
Nice. Welcome to the first recorded Rust and WebAssembly Working Group meeting. Woo! All right, so I wanted to start off with some RFC triage, which is something we've never done before because we've never had RFCs before. And in fact, the RFC that I'd like to triage is the one that proposes RFCs. Has anyone not read this? No? Yeah, I don't know. It seems like it's not getting a lot of activity, but it seems really important to kind of agree on the rules of RFCs before we start posting RFCs. So my ask would be, like, particularly core team folks, Alex and Ashley, please read it and like leave a comment or something. And then I guess like I feel weird like trying to enter an FCP before there's even been discussion or anything, but like, I don't know. Does anyone have thoughts on this?
Do you want to highlight some of the major differences between this one and the like the Rust RFC repo? Because I imagine most of us are relatively familiar with the Rust RFC process at the very least.
Yeah, so there's a small section in there highlighting the differences, but the big thing is instead of 10 days of FCP, it's only 7, because like, you know, our goal was to have a lighter weight RFC process, and so that was like one way to kind of make it a little faster and looser. And I'm actually forgetting what else was in there. Like, so I went through the Rust RFC process and like really like dug into it, and like everything that was there was kind of there for a reason, and the reason that it was there like also applied to us as far as I could tell. So like the whole, I guess what I'm saying is the Rust RFC process, like regardless of what it might feel like sometimes, is pretty lightweight. And I think the parts that like feel heavier weight are the parts that are actually really meaningful, like having to, you know, explicitly lay out your arguments in text form and things like that, and like, you know, work to consensus. Like that stuff is pretty hard. But like checking a tick box in FCP is not that hard.
Right. My one thought on this is that I think it's good for us to have this now. One thing that I would potentially add, and I'll comment this, is just that because we are a very small community at the moment, however, our actions have larger consequences for the ecosystem as we move forward, is perhaps we should have a part of the RFC that it's not really something you fill out, but like specifically encourages the need to socialize the RFC. And maybe say, like, maybe you need to add something to your RFC that says, these are the specific types of groups we need to socialize it with. Like, I think about the RFC that I want to make on expressing NPM dependencies and just being like, we need a lot of feedback from JS tool writers and JS developers on this. Because I think unlike the problems that Rust has right now, which are almost the opposite ones we have, we're going to have to do a lot of work to get people to say stuff to us. So that would be my one thing. And so additionally with that, if we don't get that many comments on this right now, I think that's okay, as long as we, you know, remind people that there is a specific process. And then maybe after the edition, when we have collected more folks, do like a revisiting of it to see if people have feelings after we've kind of done a thing.
Do you think it would make sense to add something to the template that's like, who do we need to reach out to for like feedback on this?
Yeah, I think that's a really great idea. One of the things that I tend to do when I make project one-pagers, which is like the project management version of an RFC, is to make sure to list out like who the stakeholders are, and who the like people responsible are, and just kind of like lay out like the personnel elements. And so particularly for like our current situation, I think specifically reaching out or specifying like who this affects, which is it's almost more important to get feedback from who it affects than actually the core team. But I think that it's going to rely on the core team to make sure that whatever the thing that is being proposed is socialized appropriately with people who would end up being stakeholders.
what would also maybe help is that if that is the case, within the RFC like comments section, like actually listing out how we've reached out to those groups to see, like, get them to have a stake in there. Like, did we put this out on Twitter, or did we like contact specific people who we kind of trusted with those opinions? Like, how did we do that? Just that there's some context around that. Because they might not directly want to comment on the RFC, but we might solicit feedback from them and then like voice their arguments.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that's a super good idea. And I think, I mean, additionally, with something like this, we should probably in the RFC and talking about this kind of stakeholder section, say that even if you aren't explicitly listed in or identify with the groups in the stakeholders section, you can obviously comment and it will be considered important. It's more of a like bare minimum, these people need to be involved, not a like we only care about these people. Because I could see some people maybe getting a little bit flustered about not being listed potentially.
Why wasn't I consulted?
Yes.
Yeah. Like misinterpreting like a good to have as a requirement.
Right.
Yeah. All right. The other thing that came up in the discussion was like making voting and FCP happen in parallel rather than like do the voting and then enter the FCP period.
Wait, what do you mean by voting?
So team votes start.
Did I miss that part?
Team votes like sign off that the FCP is like accepted, essentially.
Yeah, or like the way that Rust RFC works is like you say, team member so-and-so has proposed that we merge this or that we close it, and then the team signs off and then it enters FCP.
Yeah. The only reason I pause there is that in general we say like Rust doesn't vote.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the only thing. It's like the word vote. I was like, wait, we don't vote. What? Okay.
What term would you call the checkbox signing off?
I don't know, like an approve step, like, because the whole point of checking the box is not voting so much as saying I agree that consensus has been reached on this, or so is my understanding.
Yeah, I'm just like looking for a term to like replace the word voting. Yeah.
Oh, sign off.
Sign off. Okay. Yeah. So like I don't know.
Mostly just to say that like this is not a situation where like a majority rules. That's the only problem with the word voting. We can have a semantic discussion later. I did not mean to derail. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So just this idea was another way to make the process seem more lightweight and like kind of move forward a little faster, which was that we have the signing off phase and FCP happen concurrently, and then like, you know, obviously if people raise new concerns that can cancel. I'm kind of iffy on this. It's an idea. And the other thing is like, if we want to use FCP bot, it might be easier to stick closer to the Rust RFC process.
Yeah, in my mind, I think, so one thing I can share about the RFC process is that like what causes FCP and like how that happens and what that means is sometimes confusing to folks, and people feel like they end up not getting a say or something like that. I love the desire to make it lightweight, but I would also say let's just try it kind of as it kind of all the bots already work, like if the tooling works. And if we find it's too heavyweight or people are too slow, amend it then. Because we also have ways, everything's going to be a lot smaller, like the volume, at least for now, I anticipate will be way smaller. So I think fundamentally that the volume being lower is going to make it feel lighter weight anyways. I could be completely wrong though. This is just my intuition. But yeah, I'd rather use out-of-the-box tools and not have to try and fight them.
Yeah.
Well, I think most people are just going to be opening up PRs. A lot of times issues get opened up on the RFC thing for Rust as well, and you end up reading through them, but it's just like people proposing ideas of what they want to happen, and it's not actually the actual RFCs.
I would recommend, and this is something the core team has talked about, like let's turn issues off because they don't actually make sense, and them being there gives the illusion that they mean something, and that illusion is probably more damaging than just having them turned off. And we can just document, like, the way you file an issue is you file a PR.
Yeah.
Or you comment on a PR. Also, interestingly enough, this is no way like completely done, but the core team is exploring how to make the RFC process. If I say heavier weight, that will be a soundbite and I'll be screwed forever. But they're looking to add more stuff to it. So once that happens, this will already appear lighter weight. So but I don't know the timeline for that.
Okay. Does anyone have anything else to talk about for RFCs? No? Okay. Let's jump into 2018 goal status update. So first is the WASM bindgen and kind of foundational ecosystem stuff. So we just landed headless browsing, headless browser testing support for WASM bindgen's test suite. And the goal there is that we want to have, that's kind of a blocker for the WebIDL syscrate, because we want to actually test it against a browser that really has DOM methods and everything. And so I think things are going pretty well. I think we're still on track. And then the global APIs stuff, like there's tons and tons of contributors who've been joining in and new people becoming collaborators, and things are going awesome. And yeah. Shall we continue on to WASM Packy stuff?
Totally. Cool. Yeah, so I was traveling, so things are a little bit slower, but there are several PRs in flight for doing the kind of, I definitely could use some better words for this, but I'm calling them like build profiles at the moment, which is like not great. But fundamentally the configurations, the like conventional configuration profiles for the different types of tooling that we want to integrate into WASMPack. So that's happening right now. And then once the RFC's repo kicks off, doing the dependency expression stuff is what is going to happen next.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I'm pretty excited about and want to do a little bit more work on, just because I've been getting a lot of requests for it, is I know we have the book, which is very helpful, but I wonder if I kind of want to create a kind of out-of-the-box tutorial, because one of the best ways I've found to get people using the tool and kind of understanding, particularly folks coming from like a pure JS background, is giving workshops. And so making reproducible education materials for that, I think, would be really useful. So, and I guess lastly, there's not, oh wait, never mind. There's a section for this, so I'll wait till the section comes up. Never mind.
Let's see.
I was going to talk about templates.
Templates.
Yeah.
Sven isn't here, so is there anyone else who wants to give an update about bundler integration?
I have a small update, which is it's a lot more questions than it is answers. Parcel made a very large marketing push to discuss their Rust and WASM integration. I finally took a look at that yesterday, and it's a little confusing and seems to have a couple of issues. So I have followed up. I've sent some DMs to Jamie to talk about that, and I also want to circle up about it with Sven. But one of the things that they're doing, which I think is interesting, is they are wanting to accept Rust files, which is to say they want to do all of the compilation shenanigans on their own. And so one of the goals I have in writing up the like vision for WASMPAC tutorial is to try and talk about leaving all of the compilation and shenanigan steps to a tool from us, and having the bundlers work directly on packages or WASM files, which is how Webpack is now working. And so, again, I don't have a lot of background, and hopefully running the vision post will help move people in that direction. But if anybody has any background on like the bundlers wanting to own the compilation step, I just think long term that's going to be really confusing for them, and they're going to be chasing our tools, and I don't think we want that. So
I think for selling it, it's also nice where we can be like, this is easier for you too.
Right.
You don't have to deal with like whole Rust dependency graphs. Like, you know, we're making your job easier.
Yeah, exactly. And so I assume that I don't think it should be a hard sell, but I'm curious like to see that some of them are doing that. So.
Yeah, and I've seen some people try to use Parcel, and then they tried to use U with like an extern crate, and then it just didn't work at all because that's not how the compilation works. Because they're not doing it as if it was a cargo-based project, but just like I drop a Rust file in, like I drop any JS file in, and it'll act the same, and it's not at all. And
yeah,
so it causes confusion, and for something that was like touted as that, it's going to just look bad.
Yeah, my anticipation is that primarily bundlers are probably doing this because they're just unaware of the maturity of the tools on our side, or maybe not even maturity, just like complexity.
Yep.
And so hopefully getting to sit down with them and be like, hey, let's do this, will help.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree.
All right. Anything else about bundlers? We move on.
I guess my one thing is, does anybody know if there's been a roll-up update since we last? No?
Mm.
All right. I have an outstanding item to circle up with Sven, so I will do
that. Let's talk documentation book tutorials.
Okay. So this is going to kind of also the sub point for this. I'll talk about that afterwards that I put in. But documentation wise, Sarah here actually is finishing up a contributing.md, so we're going to get that in. And we merged some issue templates in case people have issues with the books. So that way it's a little bit more categorized based off what type of issue that they run into. Kind of like Parcel.js's issue tracker, which is nice. That way we can kind of categorize stuff a little bit better as they come in. There's still a couple of outstanding PRs that I just haven't had the time to get around to. I know Detail, you have a few in there, which is just my bad. So those need to get looked at. And I know Alice, my other Rust Reach mentee, is finishing up getting the Game of Life repo updated so that it will contain all of the template code that we've been working on, so that it uses that rather than just download this repo and start working on it, but instead like the actual tools that we're trying to recommend people to do, especially if we're saying like get started with the WASM kind of thing. So that should be coming in soon. But I have to be gone for like the next 2 weeks because of National Guard commitments. So I might have my phone around to like look at stuff, but to be honest, I probably won't. So if other people can like just take a look at PRs and just help triage and move them along without me around, that would be super, super helpful, just to kind of get them in and make sure people aren't like kind of waiting around for that. That would be an incredible amount of help. So like I'll try and check in, but like probably consider me dead for the next 2 weeks in many cases, in terms of like being online.
I'm actually free and not traveling for the next 2 weeks, and you have covered for me when I'm traveling. So I'll make sure to like go through every morning and make sure things are good.
Thank you. I would really, really appreciate that.
I owe ya.
Thank.
Any stray like documentation tasks in the next few weeks that you think I might be able to help out with?
Yeah, I can triage tonight, and then like mark some stuff for people to work on. There's some outstanding stuff that have just kind of been sitting around. I know some of them are maybe a little bit more difficult, but like, I mean, I loved it if people like would just take a crack at them. And some of them are just kind of more of like issues to tell people to file issues. Like, oh, if you like kind of like just like a open issue that says like, hey, if you see something wrong, like just put something in there. So I can go through and triage and I can tag some stuff probably tomorrow before I go. And then I will follow up with you and Alice to make sure that you guys can at least take some stuff on. So that should be good.
One question, I know we have like this TBA chapter on publishing in the Game of Life tutorial. Is Alice's rewrite touching that or not so much?
No, her rewrite is affecting the code that's used for the tutorial itself, which is like, how do I like set up the board? How do I get the stuff flowing? But it's not actually like going to affect the publishing. Actually, I should file an issue for that. But doing a publishing section would be a really great help and write-up because it's been TBA for a while. So if someone wants to take a crack at it, that'd be excellent.
Yeah, I was going to say, Sarah, if you wanted to take that on or something, that's been something that I think there's an open issue for it, actually. But yeah, getting that done would be rad.
It'd be great. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have on the documentation side. So I think we're doing pretty good, but I'll be MIA for the next 2 weeks for the most part.
Cool. All right. Next is website stuff. Ashley?
Yeah, I have an update on that. So the one thing I can say is it is super awesome that we have Sindil, who has volunteered to be the owner of our page on the new Rust site. Just as a little bit of background for folks who might not be aware, there's a new Rust website. It's going to get released with the edition. One of the neat things about its focus is that it's going to actually be more marketing focused, as in the audience is going to be primarily for CEOs, CTOs, and decision makers and wanting to get them to use Rust. And to that end, part of our push for these domain working groups is the domain working groups answer the question, what is Rust good for? Which is an incredibly difficult question to answer right now. And so in the what is Rust good for section, there will be a page on WebAssembly that's going to show off all of the awesome stuff we're working on. So I met with Sindil. There's kind of like a 3-stage process for how this works. The first 2 stages we don't really have to worry about because it's mostly Sindil, me, and Aaron Turan working on it. But one of the important things is collecting great content. Particularly anybody that's using Rust WASM in production is incredibly useful to have. And then links to documentation and potentially conference talks or videos. So if you happen to have that stuff, drop them in the channel or send them over to Sindil or I is a great idea. The third stage, which I don't anticipate will be anywhere no time soon, probably in late August, we'll do a review where it shows all the stuff that like Sindil has done and then Aaron and I have refined, and we'll go through it that way. I will say if you are particularly interested, it's always great to have one person, but I always think it's a code smell if one person owns a thing. So if there's anyone else who's additionally interested in the website and like wants to work with Sindil on it, it's definitely there's still availability for that. So you can reach out to me or Sindil to talk about it. But we're getting going, and we're also, this team is kind of ahead of the other teams, which is really cool. It's not a race, but it's nice to feel like we're like on top of stuff.
It's not a race, but we are winning.
You said it. I didn't say it. This is recorded.
All right. Is that everything for the website?
Yeah, for now. But yeah, if there are cool things, particularly stuff that you think CTOs or CEOs would think is super rad, do surface those, because finding that stuff is hard, and that's the stuff we're looking for.
Are we still planning on doing kind of like little live snippets, maybe with like WebAssembly Studio?
Yeah, so that is still in there. I mean, I had my meeting with Sindil Tuesday evening, so I've kind of like thrown it over the fence to him, and he has not like sent something back, which is very reasonable. It's not been very long. But I do think at some point it's really good to bring that up, that we wanted to do. So in the all hands at Berlin, Nick and I kind of was brainstorming part of this page, and one of it was like a tabbed code snippet where it showed basically like a hello world kind of thing. The goal of a code snippet would be to show how easy it is. And inevitably, I think it depends on where we end up landing. Like, if it is easy enough to have a compelling code snippet, I think we should keep it. But it really depends on how compelling we can make it. So, yeah.
Okay. Debugging. Not too much here. I mean, nothing's happened since last time, where basically we're like, wait, we have console error panic hook. That's good enough for debugging for 2018. Maybe Steve is going to dig into some of the things like adding a start function. Steve Klabnik, maybe?
I think Steve is more focused on the marketing vision stuff. Not that I'm trying to speak for Steve, but I think that might be more of his aim.
Okay.
I can talk a little bit more about that later. Or I maybe should have talked about it in the website portion. I don't know. I asked if he wanted to come to this meeting, but he couldn't get the software running because he has to compile Rust, and his computer's not that good. So.
Okay. Well, basically the status is we have this hook. It would be nice if we could install the hook in the start function. I thought maybe Steve would be interested in implementing the Rust C stuff for the start function, but maybe I was missing one.
One thing on debugging that I can share is a friend of mine, Jason Laster, who works at Mozilla and works on developer tools, asked me if I thought that people would be interested in using developer tools to debug WASM, particularly Rust-generated WASM. And so my answer was yes. And so I think in general, he's looking just for more feedback from folks about, particularly folks that are actively using this right now and have use cases that the developer tools could help them solve. While we don't directly control developer tools in Firefox, I think being able to show off that we have support from that team is really awesome. So I know that I don't currently have great feedback for him, besides that it would be a great way to help market this stuff. But if any folks want to get into that further, I know that he's looking for people, and I can share his email address with them.
That actually reminds me of another thing, which is that the WebAssembly community group is in the process of creating a sub-community group for debugging related things. And this is where kind of, Dwarf or language server or whatever that would allow Rust to actually get proper source level debugging on the web in developer tools. This is where that stuff is kind of going to be standardized and fleshed out. And so I know Jason Laster's involved in that, and so is Yulia, I can't pronounce her last name, who's also on the Firefox DevTools team. And there's once that gets merged, there's a pull request for their charter right now.
One thing is just a PSA to the folks in this group. Anyone can join the WASM community group. So if you are interested, you just go to the website and you just sign up, and they send you an email that says, welcome to the WASM community group. So probably worthwhile if you're interested in standards, or even just to kind of keep an eye on.
Yeah. Okay. Templates. Any update on the alternative WASM pack based templates?
Yes. So in the end, it may not actually be different. I mean, beyond the fact that the current template uses Webpack plugins, which this one would not. I have, instead of directing my attention too much to the template, have been directing my attention to the cargo template or cargo generate tool, which I have given myself kind of a strict deadline to release an 0.1 of tomorrow. And so when I do that, there will be some updates that we need to do for the current template that we have. I think in the long run, that the current template that we have and the WASM pack template should not be all that different, except for removing all of the Webpack specific stuff. But yeah, so mostly focused on cargo generate. If there's anybody here who is interested in doing that, the like really short summary of what cargo generate does is it's exclusively for Git repo based templates. And what it does is it clones it and then it does substitution. So you basically create a repo that's a template and then you plug values into where you put little curly brackets in your template. So not super sophisticated, but should be useful in preventing folks from having to write out a whole ton of boilerplate.
Cool. Anything else on templates? All right. Next agenda item is, so I found this thing called dependbot, and it will send pull requests. It seems like it's like Greenkeeper for NPM, except it supports Rust. And so it will send pull requests to update sub-dependencies. And that seems like something that would be useful for things that depend on WASM bindgen. And I just wanted to get people's thoughts. And
I'm into it.
Why not?
I love Greenkeeper, so I think that it sounds good. The one thing I have seen in using tools like this in large projects is that one, it will make a lot of PRs. I don't know how refined this tool is. I know Greenkeeper spent a lot of time on trying not to spam you with issues. But it is often good to have somebody who will go through and clean up all that stuff, particularly if one of them fails. I've seen issues that PRs that these types of things open up, like stay open for like months, if not years. So we just need to make sure that folks are paying attention to them. And that usually has to be people who are full collaborators. So in general, I'm a huge fan. Just it becomes a maintenance thing real fast. You have like 80 PRs open by these things. So.
Okay. And then what repos, I guess we would just look at every repo in the org and any of them that depend on WASM bindgen, really. It's something that would need this, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. Sounds good.
Okay. Alex, you want to talk about WebAssembly fallback?
Yeah, sure. So this is one that we talked about this a little earlier with some other Mozilla folks, and so this is kind of this is much more on the technical side of things in terms of possible blockers to WASM adoption. Is that if you're kind of in a production use case, you might not be using a web browser that supports WebAssembly, or kind of just, there's going to be a long tail for a long time of browsers that don't support WebAssembly or don't support features in WebAssembly, all that good stuff. And so this is one where we currently don't have a great story for what do you do in that case of how do I use WebAssembly but still work with, I think I heard 30% of my population that doesn't have WebAssembly support right now. And so this is kind of probably mostly being talking with Sven about bundlers and whatnot. But so there's one tool, WASM to ASM, in the binary end test suite, or like the binary end toolkit, which has had some work done and like it does work, but it's not in a packaged up form. Like it's a very manual thing, and everyone has to reach out and write their own code to do that. So ideally, kind of like the high level idea, what we want to do here is basically solve I want to make sure I am usable in non-web browsers, and I just like flip a flag in my bundler config, or bundlers just do it automatically and don't worry about it. And then internally, like we can figure out whether it's using WASM to ASM or whatnot. But because there's two strategies of one is this WASM to ASM where we compile WebAssembly to JavaScript and just have it have the same semantics or roughly the same semantics. The other, though, is I know Sven is thinking that maybe we can just write a WebAssembly interpreter in JavaScript, so we just ship the same WebAssembly file, but we have an entire interpreter baked in. And so those two strategies we might want to talk about at some point and figure out, but that probably won't Sven here. So there might not be a whole lot to talk about here other than asking if anyone has any thoughts about this as is or otherwise.
Don't we have the ability to output ASM.js with the what's the other backend that we have that's not the WASM32? No.
Scriptin. Emscriptin backend.
Emscriptin.
Yeah, don't we have that with Emscriptin?
That is possible, but it's subtly different enough that I suspect we probably aren't going to use that. And that's also, so for Rust code, you might be able to compile your code once, and you can compile it for both the ASM.js target and the WASM target. But I suspect that over time, the ASM.js target is probably going to become a little bit rotted and or not do so hot over time. And I just, like, already it's on an older version of LLVM. It might not have all the features. It might not keep up with WASM features. And so we might be doing fun WASM things like atomics eventually, which you can't do in ASM.js. And then the other one is that this is not necessarily just for Rust, but it's also kind of a general WebAssembly goal, which is to have some sort of fallback. And so C++ and those like various code bases may not always have the option of using Emscriptin or like the ASM.js backend instead. And so the idea is that ideally we would have here a general purpose solution for just WebAssembly, which is compiling WASM specifically, like just WASM to ASM.js. But I mean, that's certainly a possibility, and like that is probably it would be a good stopgap for today anyway, or they're roughly on the same level of parity with it.
So Alex, I know from our WASM meeting, the Mozilla WASM meeting, like it seems like a lot of people are working on this. An RFC is not exactly what I want, but if we could just document, like write down, like this is the goal, this is the problem it solves, and these are the trade-offs, and then this is what we picked, like, which is basically an RFC. I think it would be incredibly useful because I think this is something that a lot of folks care about, particularly folks that aren't in these meetings. And writing, like I've been in so many conversations and there's like a lot of info here that I've just never seen written down in one place.
That's true. Yeah.
And so like for me, like I'm like, sounds good, but like I haven't been able to consume all the information I probably would need to make an informed decision. So like I also want to tell Till that with the Mozilla folks, but we should try and have some sort of like group document that says that this is what we're trying to do and why.
I was working last summer on WASM to ASM quite a bit, and I'm interested in picking that up again soon. So Alex, you mentioned that it basically works, but it's not bundled super well. So any input you have on like how it should be bundled better?
Yeah, and like for this, so that's specifically right now you can you basically generate this like ASM.js func, which isn't really ASM.js, but it's like close enough. But it doesn't do things like global initializers, running the start function, initializing global memory, and like there's some weird integration glue which hasn't really quite hooked up yet, or like there's not a great way to translate it to an ES module. And so those are the kind of the more bundler aspects of just taking a WASM file and the ASM.js output that's already there and kind of like wrapping it up a little bit more and making it more usable by default. So ideally, you like throw in a Webpack loader, or you throw in like you turn on a roll-up option or whatever, and it just does it. It just makes and it figures out at runtime. It's like at runtime, this isn't here, and the promise of my WebAssembly, I'm just going to take a little bit longer because I'm going to go fetch all the JS instead, stuff like that.
Okay, so is that more of like a bundler functionality, or is that something that should be built into WASM to ASM as well?
That's where, like, there's certainly a couple of options. Like, we could do any of the above. I would personally probably advocate for like doing mostly in WASM to ASM, although we're thinking of renaming that to WASM to JS. And anyway, so basically doing most of that right there, and then the bundler, every bundler would share that. So like roll up, parcel, Webpack, everyone would do the same thing of just calling this one tool, and that way no one has to duplicate too much functionality.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. Anything else about fallbacks in WASM 2 JS? No? Okay. So we have a vote about this issue. I think maybe vote is the wrong word. Should we ask Sven to turn this into an RFC? So the issue is extend the bundler team to also be general, like make ES6 or ES modules work in all the places. I feel like I don't fully understand all of the issues with modules here.
Yeah, I want more information.
Yeah, I'm a little bit confused as to like why this is.
Yeah. Also, just mostly, I do feel, and this is partially in like kind of an awesome way, that the folks on the bundler team have a lot of time. But I feel like bundlers already have a rather large and important role in our stuff. So expanding that, and particularly expanding it in a way that affects a specific module type, might just be expanding it way too much, especially for a team that we really need to focus on a really specific workflow. I mean, they're both awesome, don't get me wrong, and I'm not trying to say I don't want them working on it so much as I'm just like, I think we need to keep it focused. Also, the use case it seems to cover is ES6 module support in Node, which has no timeline as far as I checked last. And so I guess additionally I would share that like I don't think this is urgent in any way. One person that I think that we might want to loop in to get some feedback on this and like the stakeholders jam that we talked about with RFCs is Lynn Clark, who is championing the WASM modules proposal in TC39 right now. So she's going to have the most information, I think. So I would probably say let's turn this into an RFC and or maybe just have a conversation about further details and loop in Lynn to see if this is exactly what we want to be doing.
Cool. Yeah, my other thought is like maybe this should be like a new team or something rather than extending an existing team.
My only thought against that is I don't think this is going to be important before the addition, and we already have more things we want to do than teams and people. So I feel like it might be more of a distraction. Yeah. But I don't know. These are just like gut level feels at the moment. So maybe I'm wrong. But no, that's my general vibe.
That's kind of what I was getting. I didn't have the feeling, at least from what I can understand of it, that it kind of plays into our 2018 edition goals. So it might be something to postpone until afterwards. Yeah. Also, not that these are important. Like definitely module integration stuff is. I just don't think it's kind of in line with what we were talking about in that blog post we released like a week or two ago.
I mean, I think it does bring up this fact that like modules in general are a really important cross-cutting concern for most of our teams. Like for WASM BindGen, like I put the common JS support in there, and then therefore WASM Pack has a flag for that. But I think it is pretty well represented across teams, and I just worry about pulling it out into its own team when it's such a kind of like inter-project concern. That it might not actually be well served by having a team dedicated exclusively to it.
Code size benchmarks, Ashley?
Yeah, so I added this just because, so as a result of a bunch of the conferences I've been going to, I've been like chatting with a whole bunch of people about the Rust WebAssembly story, and it's very cool. And so previously, I tried to push benchmarks on speed, and no one really picked that up, and that's fine. But one thing that I think we really should do, and I know for WASM Pack, it's one of my priorities, and I think maybe with WASM BindGen might actually be the better place to put it. I'm not sure. But one of the things that I've gotten from the folks in the WebAssembly community group is they are very concerned about the size of the binaries that Rust-generated WASM is producing. In general, they think they are too big, and okay. And the thing that I was kind of struck by is, like, to be honest, I don't have like a solid pulse on the size of the binaries we're creating, and I also don't have a great way of evaluating how the size of those binaries are changing over time as we develop further things. And especially with the build profile configurations that we're adding to WasmPack, I'm going to want to be able to demonstrate why doing things this way is a good idea. And so having like some sort of canonical way to establish either goals for what our code size is, or at least to be able to watch it over time, seems really useful. If anything, because a lot of the people we're trying to sell on Rust being a great language for WebAssembly seem incredibly focused on it. For better or for worse, but definitely seems like something slightly easier to benchmark at this point than speed.
So would something like Rust has a benchmark for the compiler that gets run, like, I think every day or close to, and then we can kind of see it over time. Would something like that kind of help? Like, we have like a couple of different size projects that we just compile and then say, like, here's the size.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I was just thinking with WasmPack, just like a general, like, our tutorial makes a hello world and this is the size. And we're actually doing some stuff in the WasmPack tutorial right now that makes the size really big. So just knowing these things, because these are also things that we should be able to explain to other people who care about code size to, like, not do, like pulling in all the formatting shenanigans. It's pretty huge. Maybe you don't want to do that. So I don't know. It's mostly just like, do people think that code size is a good measurement to look at right now? And if so, are there other people who care, who want to work on this with me?
I think code size is super important, right? I mean,
yeah.
You have to generally send the WASM over the network, so it's a pretty big deal. And like, we do have tools for looking into like where code size is coming from. In Rust C, Alex added like a simple test that, like, a binary that does like a very simple panic only has this big a size, but like the big code size things putting size into the code are like formatting stuff that gets pulled in by panicking stuff, and to some degree the allocator, depending on how like little we're trying to get. So I don't know, like, we have solutions for those things. They're not really good solutions, like WASM Snip, right?
I don't know. I think they're pretty good. Like, I guess what I'm saying is, like, I think we have solutions, but we don't have a way to show people the problem.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, like, ideally, in my mind, we wouldn't need WASM Snip at all, and like, we would just be able to turn off panicking and stuff, and then that stuff wouldn't show up at all. But we're not quite there yet. And I agree that like some kind of like chronological, like, you know, something to keep our eye on it would be really nice.
Yeah.
And it'd be cool to like integrate Twiggy too, so we could.
Oh, totally. Like, I think we actually have like a fair amount of very awesome tooling. And again, as I was saying with WasmPack, the fact that we want to integrate a bunch of that, like, in order for me to sell the added complexity, I'm going to want to be able to say, like, and this is what it gets you, and it's quite awesome. But I do think right now also, particularly for trying to sell Rust-generated WASM to JS folks, is like, we don't even have like a baseline of what we consider acceptable. Or maybe not even acceptable, just like, here's where we're at.
Yeah.
So that might be useful. And that kind of comes down to kind of creating this canonical program, like, example thing that we use for it. But I'm like really excited to do some stuff on this. So I mostly wanted to see if people thought it was a good or a bad idea. Because inevitably when you measure stuff, it can cause all sorts of effects. So if we agree it's a reasonable thing to measure and put in a vaguely public spot, I'm down to do some stuff on it.
I think that would be cool. I think it would also help if we just had some like JS equivalent benchmarks. I know, because people are like, well, I want it smaller. And I'm like, okay, that might be true, but like, what's also good enough? and like is just the WebAssembly that we output baseline without snipping anything and doing anything extra like still faster than the JavaScript equivalent. Like I know
faster. I don't know if I want to get into faster right now. I'm willing to
maybe not faster, but like just like something to compare it to, because I mean, if we're trying to sell to JS people, they're probably going to want that comparison too.
Yeah.
And I do think we're going to eventually want smaller code size anyways, just because it is network bound. But you know, there's a lot of stuff that is also being done on the web browser side to make things faster, and like so I just feel like we're kind of like in the dark at this point. So like having anything would be better than nothing, but like also just kind of understanding that we have different browsers are going to implement things differently, and how does it compare to JavaScript and whatever. So I think we're gonna have like a wide variety of benchmarks, and I don't think it's just gonna be code size.
Oh, I agree. I guess I just figured that size. So one, I've seen a ton of comments, both in my own DMs, the WASM Discord, and IRC that talk about code size. And the question almost always is, why is what I'm getting from WASM BindGen and WASM Pack so much bigger than X? And I was mostly just really embarrassed because I was like, I don't even know the size of the thing that we're making. Maybe I should friggin' know that.
So. I mean, yeah, that's fair. I mean, people are going to ask that, and I think it'll be good if we just all know that anyway. So I'm definitely A+ the code size benchmarks. I'm just also thinking longer term, because putting up benchmarks, people are going to want other ones.
Yeah, I mean, I had tried to push speed ones, and no one took me up on it. So,
I would say when people come asking those questions, point them to Twiggy and let them answer the question themselves, essentially. And say like, oh, all the code size is coming from, panicking, whatever, right?
Yeah, I do point them to Twiggy, but I also it's not that, oh my gosh, we have a code size profile, go check it out, isn't a good answer. But it's also a sort of RTFM answer that, depending on the person and how important it is for me to continue to have them be excited and stuff, it can be really useful to also be able to share some info and then be like, if you want to look more into your own thing, here's a tool where you can do it.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of JS folks who have never used a profiler like that before, and so even just using it can be kind of intimidating.
We're also very much in the mode of these are bugs, or they may be caused by bugs, and so just keeping a catalog of these kinds of things, we know how to fix them, and so we some of this is go read the page is about about size profiling as to why it's so big, and there's gotchas of how to do things, and we'll try to turn those on by default eventually. And so just having that would also be helpful to from a bird's eye view, what's the most common things that people keep getting tripped up on, or what's the most common reason, so we can focus our own efforts.
Yeah, and I think the overall holistic benchmark and comparison to JS is going to be kind of hard. And that's going to involve, not just size to size comparisons, but WASM is so much faster to parse. You can kind of parse and instantiate during streaming from the network, whereas you can't really do that in JavaScript, or at least no one is right now.
This is why I punted on that.
Yeah, exactly.
Benchmark. I was like, what's the easiest benchmark we can do?
Yeah, that's a much harder one, and I would leave that to browser vendors, because they want to compete with each other on that, and so they're going to make those benchmarks eventually. But for us, we should definitely have our own kind of internally focused, something like perf.rustlang.org, where we are watching the size and making sure that we're not regressing it and stuff, and then for users who come and ask, we can have the documentation and other stuff.
Yeah. I also think it would be really useful at this point to have something that says this is what we expect, so that folks who are face checking this and suddenly getting something weird, those are the types of bugs we want people to file, because we can go fix them. And so a lot of people might be running into that stuff and just not knowing, and it's that attitude that if my code size is friggin' huge, like a lot of people don't read that as, oh, that's a bug. They just read it as, oh, Rust makes huge binaries. And so having a way to signal like, actually, no, those are probably bugs and we'd love to fix them. Please file them. That's like not like a call to action we really have yet. So I don't know, just thoughts. I'm going to try and pull something together and I'll show it at next meeting. And if anyone else is interested, very happy to work with other folks on it.
Sounds good to me. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to talk about at the meeting? That's everything on the agenda.
Yeah, no, I think we're good.
I had one thing, which was the thing that kind of vaguely regarding Steve. I've had the awesome opportunity to hang out with Benedict Moyer a lot in like the last couple of weeks. He's the manager of the V8 team. And we had like all sorts of conversations, but one of the conversations that we have been kind of returning to frequently, and I've gotten this from a lot of folks in the WebAssembly area, is that a lot of the folks working on WebAssembly right now are very focused on the tech. And that's like just so, I mean, it's cool tech. And so it's like true. But I think that there is a fair amount of non-specifically technical work that is going to be really important for the success of WebAssembly in general, like kind of shifting people's minds and getting them to understand the problems that it solves and what it solves well. And so I know Till, who's the WebAssembly manager at Mozilla and ET, is starting to give like a lot more conference talks. And I know that the ask for conference talks is getting larger. But I wonder if there's not a way that we could, particularly as we start thinking about the website page and just in general, like we can build all this awesome tech, but if nobody uses it, like that's not super great. So maybe thinking about setting a goal for maybe evangelism is the right word. I don't know. It's really just marketing, but some people don't like that word. But like it's thought leadering, frankly. So I know we're doing like a ton of that with our blog series, which is like really awesome. But just to keep a mind open to that. And like, I think that we are in a spot where we're getting a lot of technical contributors right now, but trying to get folks that maybe don't want to contribute like code to code profiler tool, but maybe are willing to like give a workshop or give a presentation, might be an interesting way to grow the team to help take care of some of that workload.
So like a mini community team specifically for the working group?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know if we even need to formally make it a team, but like just reminding people that we actually really want folks to come help evangelize this, because sometimes we can't get it done because we're all working on the tech stuff. So just making it like finding a place to like have those people land so that they know that they are also wanted in this group.
This could tie back into the kind of like reusable workshop material kind of stuff.
Yeah, these ideas are connected.
Yeah, it would be cool to put together like a like vision for like where WASM fits into, you know, the JavaScript, and here's how you do like your tutorial kind of stuff as like a single slide deck and everything.
Yeah, I think even just having a deck in our org that's like a weird, once we get all the vision posts and stuff out, I think you already have like a really good start to that, Nick, from your presentation at the Mozilla All Hands. But yeah, something that's like a reusable decks are complicated, but like maybe that's a good start.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just know that a lot of folks in WebAssembly right now are thinking about like, we need people who are focusing on the not tech part too. So.
Okay. We've gone for about an hour now. Anyone have anything that must be talked about now and not maybe next week? Okay.
Actually, I have 10 more topics. I'm just kidding.
I have this bike shed. I don't know what color to paint it, and we need to talk about it now.
My yak is too hairy. It's too hot in New York. Needs a shave.
Okay, I think we've reached the end of the meeting. Thanks everybody for coming.
All right.
And
All right.
Talk to you next week and online.
See you all in a few weeks. Bye-bye.